I think I'm just going to start with the introduction, and people are still allowed to come in. I'm very happy to welcome you here for the third and for this moment final webinar of the Joint Dissemination Network. So we've already had two. The first one was on the 5th of September. The recording is already available online. And the second one was on the 19th of September, and we're currently working on getting the recording available for you to watch as soon as possible. The people who were here for the previous webinars already know what I'm going to do now, but I've spiced it up slightly this time. So my name is Noralie. I am the project manager for communication and dissemination of the HoloRuminant project, who is the host of the webinar series. But I would also like to introduce you to the company I work for, which is European Forum of Farm Animal Breeders. And as you can see here on slides, FOP is the association that represents European farm animal breeders. Our breeders and cooperatives and private companies active in genetic improvement of pigs, ruminants, poultry, aquaculture, and insects are our members, and we provide them with the support they need. But next to that, we also have the FABER-TP board, which is the FABER technology platform. This is the Farm Animal Breeding and Reproduction platform, and this is composed of research institutes and academia, and also the FOP members that you saw on the previous slide. So what do we actually do? So FOP ensures the representation of our members on the European, well, mainly European level. We support European policy and legislation, and we have also we support and promote responsible balanced animal breeding by the production of the code FABAR, the Code for Responsible Animal Breeding. We support and engage the dialogue around sustainable animal breeding and farming in general. And we're also a knowledge provider in European projects. And in that capacity, we are here today. On the bottom, you can see some of the projects we are involved in, including HoloRuminant. And the technology platform focuses on developing and shaping the research and innovation agenda and priorities. And we also aim to connect research with knowledge institutes and the private sector. All in all, this promotes and supports research and innovation in animal breeding. One final slide on this. So overall, what we do is we engage in dialogue with the policymakers and the stakeholders, all to represent the animal breeders in Europe. We support and promote responsible animal breeding with code FABAR. If you want any more information on that, feel free to get in touch with us. We promote and support research and innovation, and we also advocate for proportionate and science-based policy and legislation. All of these are, of course, intertwined. So that's a little bit of an introduction towards FOP. And then we're going to now go to the house rules of our webinar today. If you have any questions, you can ask them in the Q&A box. We'll also have a Q&A after each presentation. You can post your questions in the Q&A box during the presentations, but you can also ask them at the Q&A session after the presentation. If you have any technical issues, or you know, for instance, of any colleagues that have trouble getting into the meeting, you can contact my colleague, Maureen McDonald, also via email. You can see it here on screen. Please mute yourselves during the presentations, and please note that we are recording this webinar. If you don't want to be recorded, it's better to leave the meeting and then watch the recording afterwards. So a little bit about why we are here today. The webinar series is part of the HoloRuminant Joint Dissemination Network. This network aims to provide a common ground and an environment to optimize and share efforts, communication materials, and resources. And in this Joint Dissemination Network. We have 5 projects that represent a complementary effort to reduce the environmental footprint and climate footprint of livestock production. Over the course of the webinar series, we've already seen presentations from all of these projects. And today we'll hear from GEroNIMO and RUMIGEN. So without further ado, I think we're going to go to the first presentation, who will be given by Marie-Josée Mercat from the GEroNIMO project. So the floor is yours.
Thank you. So, good morning. I will share my screen. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay.
That looks perfect.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to present the results of this broad survey from the GEroNIMO project, which aimed at collecting the perception of the stakeholders of the pig and chicken local breeds. So briefly, a few words about the project. So GEroNIMO will provide pig and chicken breeders with new knowledge and tools to promote the use of innovative genome and epigenome-enabled selection methods for efficient livestock production traits, such as fertility or feed efficiency. The full consortium is composed of 21 partners from 11 countries, and the project is built on a multi-actor approach involving both academic partners and private companies and professional associations in order to facilitate the transfer of the results. So Leon will next present you work package 5. There are also traditional work packages for knowledge transfer and of the project, but there are 2 work package 1 and 2, which aim at identifying the biological mechanisms affecting trait variations, studying both environment and genetic factors. And these work packages will produce data that will be used in work package 4 to improve the selection strategies of chicken and pigs. And in another work package, which is work package 3, which is dedicated to biodiversity. So to give you a bit more detail on this work package in which I'm involved, it focuses on local breeds, and it contains three tasks. The first one aims at characterizing the management programs of local breeds through a survey, of which I will present you soon some results. A second task aimed at implementing breeding programs in local breeds, promoting genotyping, phenotyping, and optimal contribution selection approaches. And the third task studies the diversity layers, including genotyping and epigenotyping data. Here are pictures of the local breeds that are used in the case studies in this work package. And now I come to the survey. In fact, there were 2 surveys which were available online from October 2021 to mid-January 2022. They were translated in 7 languages, and questions were very similar in the chicken and the pig surveys. By the end, 339 pig stakeholders and 203 chicken stakeholders were kept for analysis, and they came from 12 countries with unbalanced representation. And in total, 125 local breeds are represented by at least 1 stakeholder, 94 chicken breeds and 31 pig breeds, again with unbalanced contribution representation. The idea with the survey was to involve the stakeholder in the project and to get them to describe their farm, their management, their preservation program, to identify ways, levels to improve them. And there were, in fact, many topics covered by the survey, including questions related to profitability, for example, quality levels, and the view of the futures of the stakeholders. So the survey confirmed the predominant main characteristics of the rearing mode of the local breeds, which are reared outdoor, mostly outdoor, with purebred reproduction, relying mostly on natural mating, and with mating plants which are only partly fully controlled, especially in chickens. And the choice of the future breeding animals mainly rely on the respect of the breed standard. And in fact, indeed, there is almost no genetic evaluation in pig and chicken local breeds. Nevertheless, most of the participants said they were in favor of selection on production traits for the chicken participant and reproduction trait for the pig participant. Only a minority of the stakeholders said they were against selection, and when we asked them why, they said that it was because of a lack of human or financial resources. Indeed, the survey confirmed obstacles to the implementation of selection in local breeds, such as the small size of the farm, very small size. The median size is only 15 heads and 9 cells. The farms are poorly connected to each other. Environments are variable between farms and intra-farms. And the collection of basic information used in genetic evaluation, such as animal or parent IDs, is quite incomplete, especially in chickens. So using the answers to few questions, we defined 3 distinct pig breeder profiles. So in black, the P1 profile is characterized by the breeders with less income and less animals. And this profile is more represented in Croatia and in Slovenia. In red, the P2 profile is characterized by the biggest farm. It is less represented in Croatia and in Slovenia and more in Portugal. And in green, the P3 profile is characterized by more processing activity, more sale of fresh meat, and it is more frequent in France and less in Portugal. Then we manually added a 4th group, mostly composed of managers, people involved in local breeds, but not we don't own breeding animals. And this group is also contains few breeders who were not classed. We similarly defined 3 chicken breeder profiles from C1 to C4 with an increasing size of the farms, and also a C4 groups for the managers and the few unclassed breeders. On each of these figures, you can see on the left side the answers of the different chicken profiles, C1 to C4, and on the right side the answer of the pig profiles. And even if overall the chicken breeders, the median income percentage linked to local breed activities is null for the chicken breeders, versus 42% for the pig breeders. So despite this fact, as you can see on the top left, the C3 profiles, meaning the biggest chicken farms, has the highest income percentage. And this profile is in fact closer to the pig profiles than to the other chicken profiles. On the right side, you can see the economic motivation, which is variable from one group to another one, and it is the highest for the P2 and the P3 pig profiles. The leisure motivation on the bottom left clearly differentiates the chicken breeders from the pig ones. So the leisure motivation is in fact the second motivation of the chicken breeders. The first one being genetic preservation of genetic genetic diversity, and it is common with the pig breeders. So a major difference regarding leisure motivation. And also, on average, chicken breeders are involved with more breeds than the pig breeders, 2.8 on average versus 1.1, and it is even more breeds for the C3 biggest farms. We then used these different groups to look at the answers given by the participant and to see whether they were different, their answers were different or not, depending on the group. Here you can see the use of quality labels to valorize the product associated with local breeds, and you can see that quality labels are more used by pig breeders, 55%, compared to chicken breeders, only 23%. In pigs, PDO is the main quality label used, especially for the biggest farm. But organic label is also quite used, especially in the process in the P3 group, the group composed of processors. And this organic label is the most used by the chicken breeders. A large part of the questions were dedicated to the view of the future of the participant, and most of them express concern about the future of about the sustainability of the local breed in the future. And interestingly, the same topic emerged in the chicken and in the pig surveys. So the main risks which were perceived were risks linked to the regulation, and behind that, the sanitary regulation is the most mentioned, and risk and economic risk, and behind that, the lack of profitability, and for the pig participants, the abusive use of the local breed name without respecting dedicated specification. Most of the participants also expect more public support, but the expectation differs between pig and chicken stakeholders, while they almost don't vary between the different groups within a species. So the chicken stakeholders, their main expectations were first support for research programs on chicken local breeds, then support for more human needs for the preservation program. And this is mainly expressed by the C4 groups, meaning the managers, the chicken managers, and less by the smallest size breeders. Then support to start selection programs in local breeds, and support to encourage the productivity. And this last expectation, support to encourage the productivity, is the only common expectation with the pig participant. So for the pig stakeholders, the main expectation was this productivity, first productivity, then support to fight against the abusive use of the local breed names, then support to have access to slaughterhouses, which are close to farms. And this is more expressed by the P3 group, meaning the processor group and the managers, and then support to sanitary protect the farms. So to summarize, there were many similarities in the answers given by the pig and the chicken stakeholders, many similarities in the way animals are reared, small size, outdoor rearing, the main motivation, which is genetic diversity, the main interest for selection, the main concern about the breed sustainability. But there were some differences, and the main differences are associated with economic activities, which are significant for the pig stakeholders, while chicken stakeholders are more involved in it's more a leisure activity. There were also differences in the expectation toward public support, and some other, many more results were produced by the survey related to the veterinary follow-up and so on, but I have no time to develop them. But you can find the full report, which is available on the website of the project. So do not hesitate to follow GEroNIMO. And to finish, I want to acknowledge the European Union for the funding, and the stakeholder, the breeding organization, and all who contributed to the promotion of the survey. And I thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much for your presentation. Yeah. If there are any questions for Marie-José, the floor is open. I think you were very clear.
Yes, I hope so.
Yeah, so if anything comes up in the meanwhile, still feel free to put them in the chat, because Marie-José can still answer them there. And we'll also upload the recording later, so you can always get in touch with Marie-José to get back to these questions.
For sure.
Thank you again. So I think if there are no questions, I don't see anything happening. We are going to the second speaker from GEroNIMO, which is Leon Borgdorff. Leon, the floor is yours.
Hello, yeah, thank you very much for having me. Let me quickly share my screen, then my presentation is going to be seen as well. Let me just see, I usually work with Teams instead of Zoom. So, but it should be there now.
I think it's coming.
Yeah. My presentation.
Yeah, it looks great.
Perfect.
Okay, there you go.
Yeah, so welcome everybody. Thank you for joining. Today I'm going to present about the perceptions of genome editing of farmed animals in Germany, Slovenia, France, and the Netherlands, which are the countries where we conducted focus groups about this topic. And yeah, already give the first impressions because we are still busy with the analysis. So okay, let me see how I can move. There it is. So I'm part of work package 5 of the GEroNIMO project that Marie-José just explained the project. And our aim, our work package is to work on the societal, but also the ethical dimensions of breeding. And it's to broaden and specify the analysis of the ethical and societal dimensions of evaluation of genomics innovations. And on the one hand, we broaden the analysis and debate. So we also pay attention to cultural and regional differences between the different countries, but also, for example, between the countryside and the more urban areas in the evaluation of genomics innovations. And second, we want to integrate science and society because so far it's mostly a debate happening among scientists. And our goal is to integrate science and society. So we have a specific case study, and we interviewed people from the general public. And based on these results, we want to have a proof of principle that will be used as a case study to analyze the ethical, societal, and legal dimensions. And in doing so, we want to bridge existing generic assessments of genomic innovations with more concrete questions in real-life questions and pigs, and build the analysis on an iterative process between geneticists, animal scientists, social scientists, and ethicists to better integrate the ethical and societal aspects of the project. So it's a really interdisciplinary approach. So what we did before, what was the start of our working package, is of course, before analyzing the ethical and societal implications of these technologies, we need to take a look at the literature. And fortunately, there was already several reviews, but it's still not a huge field. But what the literature reviews so far indicated is that there were 4 different types of lags in the current debate, which is wide is too narrow, and we want to broaden it. So the first one was a representation of the general public. It was mostly a debate among scientists. The second is that non-human animals were not sufficiently considered. So it was mostly about human benefits of breeding technologies and animals. Well, animal welfare played some role, but broader concepts like animal rights, animal integrity, they were not really strongly considered. The third one is disciplinary diversity. So it's mostly people from the animal genetics side, some animal ethicists, some veterinarians, but overall, there are not many disciplines engaging with this topic. And fourth, it's a wide range of ethical arguments is not really given in the current debate. Like there's one ethical theory, it's called consequentialism, which says that an action is good if the outcomes are good. And this is mostly what people applied in their reasoning. So they took the status quo, compared it with applying the technology, and looked at the consequences. And that's how they made ethical judgments. But there are way more ethical theories that could be considered in such an analysis. So our goal was to broaden this debate. And I think one good way to do this is empirical research and also integrating the public. And by doing so, we get to know the arguments of the public. We increase the representation of them because we take their arguments into account. And also we ask specific questions about animals to work on the second part. And we started with semi-structured interviews with 23 people from the field first. And there we talked to people in the breeding sector, animal protection, and also farmers to ask them what they think about such technologies. And different arguments came up. So the first argument was that technology is neutral. This means that technology is not inherently good or inherently bad, but it depends on how you use a certain technology. And 3 participants gave the comparison between CRISPR-Cas and nuclear power. They said nuclear power, it's an technology that you can use for the good, like for energy, but also for the bad, like a nuclear bomb. And it's a common argument, but it's philosophically quite interesting because the assumption that nuclear power, for example, is neutral because you can use it for the good or bad, it's highly contested because there are people who say also the good use of the technology. It's not only good, there are also some dangers coming with it. It also shapes the way we live together as a society, so it's not completely neutral. The second argument was consumer capitalism, which basically was related to 2 things. On the one hand, there's this mentality of consumers who are always looking for the lowest prices. But on the other hand, there's also the price pressure for relevant stakeholders that the product needs to be as cheap as possible. And there's this concurrence with competition with other companies. And this doesn't allow people to do the best on the ethical aspects. The third argument is the slippery slope. This means if we allow for a small step A in the near future, it will also give room to a larger step B that we don't allow now, but allow if we allow for the first small step A. So in the practical words, this means, now we start editing pigs for a specific trait, and maybe in 10 years, we will allow for some specific kind of super pig that we would not allow for now. The fourth type of argument was playing God and dominating nature, which basically refers to now what we are doing if we use really strong editing technologies, just like CRISPR-Cas, is a too strong effect on the on nature, and we are overestimating our human capacities of thinking what we can alter or not. And people found it dangerous. The next one, quite related, but from a similar, from a different perspective, its side effects is that people are worried, okay, if we use this technology, what are the side effects? Are the side effects for the nature, for animal well-being, or anything else? We don't know, and people were scared of that. And the last one is the technological fix. So they said, instead of enhancing welfare using breeding technologies, we should enhance welfare in other ways by changing the system, how we farm. And the main takeaway is that it's not really new arguments. All of them are also known from different debates. So in the literature, these arguments, they are quite known. And also, I can already give that away. Although the analysis is not completed, many of these arguments come back in the focus group discussions of the general public as well. The second one is that in general, respondents were more open towards using breeding technology for animal welfare purposes than for human purposes, like allergen-free animal products or an increase in productivity. And this is also something that came back in the focus group in the 4 different countries that we had. And third, there were concerns that genome editing is the wrong solution to the existing problems and the system changes needed, which is the technological fix argument. Yeah, and this also came back in the focus group discussions. So the second step before this round of interviews was to interview people from the different countries to look at these national and regional differences. And we thought that this would be, of course, very important to deal with the societal dimensions, because some issues are very specific to different countries. And here again, we talked to breeders, animal advocates, and policymakers instead of farmers this time, because it was more about the political dimension. And yeah, we started with desk research, but this is pretty limited. There is not much about this topic so far. But yeah, this is not really a big problem for us, but it only shows that it's relevant to look into this. And this is exactly what we have done. So yeah, we did the interviews with the people from the 4 countries and looked at country-specific issues. And we had 3 main topics, which is more general genetics and technologies, more general animal farming, and then specifically animal breeding. And there were a lot of similarities in all countries, which I would like to mention first before going to those country-specific issues. So in all of the countries, there's little debate about genetic technologies. People don't really know about it. And if it is the case, it's quite polarized, that people are either super scared and want GMO-free food and say, oh no, we should not do it. Or you have people just pushing for it and say, no, it's not dangerous at all. We should push it very far. But there are not really much nuances, and people get very passionate about it. But in general, it's still a topic that for most people, it doesn't really happen. About animal farming, a lot of people talked about housing. No one really knows about breeding and cares about it. And also there's a lot of case history. So it's about single cases of, I don't know, like burning stables was the thing that came up. So it's really like single cases, or like also bad farms who are exposed. And then people always talk about these single incidents and talk about housing, but there's, yeah, also the nuances are missing in this debate. And yeah, about breeding, there is not really much of a public debate in these 4 countries. People don't really know much about this topic. And specific issues were in France, it was culture and food. There's a strong need for food quality, that there are labels specifically for food quality, that there is this importance of local breeds. These topics also came back in Slovenia, but it was more strongly present in the French interviews. In Slovenia, a specific issue was cloning, that people mentioned this about genetic technologies, which was not mentioned in other countries, but all 4 Slovenian respondents mentioned the issue of cloning. So apparently people seem to associate genetic technologies very strongly with cloning. In Germany, the topic of chick culling was very prominent because it was just banned by the court in the time we conducted the interviews, the culling of male day-old chicks. And in the Netherlands, there's this nitrogen crisis, that there is nitrogen in the ground and they exceed the values given by the European Union. And then the government takes measures to reduce the number of farmed animals, but the farmers don't feel that they're probably taking into account, and there are huge protests by the farmers against that. And Furthermore, in the Netherlands, people are very proud of their cows, of their dairy cows specifically. The dairy cows are always seen as a positive example of animal husbandry, while the pigs are always seen as a negative example of animal husbandry in the public debate. So people say cows are doing pretty well, pigs are doing pretty bad. So these were the preparations for the focus groups. This is what came up. You know, the interesting questions is, of course, what do we actually do in the focus groups, which is the main part of our project so far. And so this was the work that we have done. We did 8 focus groups in total with 73 participants in total. And in each country, France, Germany, Netherlands, and Slovenia, we did 2 focus groups, one in a rural area and one in an urban area, because we wanted to take these differences also into account between the urban areas and the countryside. And the further selections criteria were age, that there was at least one person under 30, one person above 55, and one in between. About gender, we said like always between, always like 3 males and 3 females at least. About education, we wanted to have 3 academics and 3 non-academics at least. And about moral eating behavior, we always wanted to have at least 2 people who are either flexitarian, vegetarian, or vegan or something like that, and 2 people who are not. And but the second one was very easy to find. The first one was more difficult. And we, again, like in the interviews, we discussed 3 different topics: the human-animal relation in different circumstances. So first we asked people individually what they thought about it, how we should look at animals. We prepared several positions, like animals are a resource, animals are autonomous and rational beings, or animals are like valuable property, animals are part of nature. And then we asked them to pick a position. We asked them how we should look at animals in an ideal future in 15 years. We asked them how they look at animals after they see like the story of one individual animal. And we asked them to indicate what they think, how farmers or like the farming industry looks at animals and what their vision is on that. Then we looked at the future of farming. We looked at different scales, which are animals, like how should we in the future of farming look at animals. The second one is the role of technology, like how innovation-based and how labor-based should the future of farming be. Should be a lot of technologies, like, for example, precision livestock farming with sensor technology and AI and tracking. Or should it be like more labor-based, that the farmers do more work? And finally, there was a scale: should the future be more internationally run by big companies or more local by regional farmers? And we prepared like several scenarios, including backyard chickens, precision livestock farming, farmers as producers of cultured meat, plant-based proteins, and then let people discuss these scenarios. And finally, we went into genetic technologies with a focus on CRISPR-Cas. So we explained CRISPR-Cas to the people, asked them what they think about it, and or whether they heard it before. Then we went into different breeding goals. One, we had the human-related breeding goals, like allergen-free food, or also productivity, meat quality. Second one was animal welfare-related breeding goals, such as resistance towards diseases, towards heat, or breeding cows without horns, so they don't need to be dehorned anymore. Third one was environmental issues, like the methane that cows put out, or also phosphate or nitrogen. Like our food efficiency was also a sustainability-related breeding goal. And finally, we had like the transition towards more plant-based proteins, for example, by breeding stem cells to have better quality of cultivated meat. And then we let people rank these different goals. And then we had different scenarios about how they think humans will interact with this technology. If genome editing is on the market, will it be a revolution that makes everything better, that we can get high quality meat for a lower price, and everything's gonna be better, the animal welfare issues will be solved? Will it be like negative scenario, that is the model of farming is more intensive, and we just use the technology to alter the animals to make them fit into the system and further intensify animal farming? Or is there like a third scenario which is more pragmatic, that says, well, there could be better solutions in terms of a system change, but on the short and middle term, it's the best thing we can do to enhance animal welfare and sustainability. So these are the things we discussed in the focus groups. And
Leon, can you keep an eye on the time?
Yeah, it's my last slide.
Perfect.
So the discussions were interesting. Participants were involved, really engaged. There were a lot of differences, arguments, both within and between the groups, and we're going to analyze them. So we already transcribed and translated the focus groups, and now we are doing the qualitative coding, which means that we look back at recurring patterns, and then we're going to analyze the arguments, both in terms of on a descriptive level, which arguments are there, and which are coming back, but also to focus on the ethics behind it, like to test them basically on which assumptions are they based, are they logically coherent, and those kind of things. And based on that, we're planning to write 1 or 2 papers. And yeah, this is what we have done. Thank you very much for listening. And also thank you very much, to our partners and everyone who participated in the focus groups. Do you have any questions?
Thank you so much, Leon. Yes, exactly the same question. Are there any questions for Leon? Apparently not in the moment. If there are any questions after, I think Leon is happy to answer them. So put them in the chat, or we'll make sure that we can put you in touch with Leon. Thanks again for your presentation. It was really, really clear and very interesting to hear. We're going to stay in the same field a little bit. We're going to Rasmus Mikkelsen from the RUMIGEN project, and he is also going to talk about ethics. So Rasmus, the floor is yours.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I will just share my screen here. There we go. So I hope that works for all of you. Yeah, ethics. I'm not sure that we're actually doing ethics in the traditional sense here. But what we're trying to do in RUMIGEN is to understand the boundaries of social acceptance of new technologies in ruminant breeding, right? So of course there are ethical dimensions to this, but there are dimensions beyond ethics as well. And so I'm sure most of you, probably looking at the participant list, are familiar with what RUMIGEN does. As I don't have a lot of time, I won't spend time going into detail on that. Also, I'm not the best person to do that. But I will sort of, as a general overview, the idea, sort of the driving push in RUMIGEN is to develop new breeding strategies and technologies for ruminants to help them better adapt to stresses like heat stress and other factors that are, partly as they are becoming more pressing as a result of climate change. So what do we do in RUMIGEN in the social accept work package, which we at the Danish Board of Technologies are working on? Well, we're trying to understand how these technologies and strategies can move from the lab, so to speak, to the landscape, so to practice. And I think I think that's central to a project like RUMIGEN, because I think it's important we remind ourselves, why are we doing the research? Well, we're hoping to impact practice, right? The point of developing technologies or strategies is to, in the long run, adapt our practice to be either more sustainable, have higher animal welfare, have higher efficiency, or achieve other goals that we would like to achieve in our breeding. So we hope to impact practice. And the question is, how do we do that? Well, impact requires action, right? So if you want to take the findings of a project like RUMIGEN and have them make a difference in practice, you need to be able to access practice. You need to be able to influence practice. And to do that, you require what I here call permission. So essentially, you need to be allowed to make these adaptations to practice, right? And that is defined by the social contract, the sort of the boundary space we have to work in of what adaptations we can make, what changes we can make to our breeding strategies and management strategies in the future. And that social contract is a product of a negotiation between society, research and industry, and other relevant stakeholders to the process, right? And so essentially we are negotiating a space and some definitions about what we want our future breeding in the agricultural sector to look like in rumigen, specifically in ruminants, right? And so that negotiation is essential to be able to reach from the lab. So finding all these new strategies and technologies in rumigen and actually having them have effect in the real world. It's essential that we understand this contract and what we can do within it and how we might be able to renegotiate it in the future. And I think rumigen, I won't spend a lot of time on this slide and you don't need to read it in detail. I just wanted to point out that I think rumigen actually in some ways is sort of a good example of how and why we integrate these social acceptance elements in what might be considered sort of fairly basic research, right? And I think the important thing rumigen is doing is it's understanding that social acceptance isn't a separate parallel track that should run as its own silo in a research project that is sort of engaging broadly with the idea of whatever the research is on. Rather, it should be, for it to be successful and impactful and help the other work packages be impactful, it should engage with the other work packages. It should understand the work that's being done, and it should input its results about, well, what are our options in the future? What are the strategies that are likely to succeed? And we should help the other work packages understand that context to make sure that the work they're doing is relevant and impactful going forward. So that's a lot of words, but essentially the point is there's no point in working very hard and spending a lot of resources and time on developing technologies that have no chance of being adopted in practice. So there might be some point to it, but at least if you're doing it with the intention of changing practice, then to some extent you're wasting your time. So understanding what those boundaries are and making sure that we're working within them to the degree that we want to impact practice is really important. And by having a social acceptance work package integrated into the overall research project rather than running as its own track is a good way of doing that. But so what we're doing in work package 2 is we're trying to understand the social contract, what it looks like and what it might look like in the future, right? And I'm sure, as I put here, researchers don't like it generally. So I'm sure most of you will have colleagues that you've heard say something like, they just don't understand, or the general public don't know what they're talking about. And implied in that, sometimes at least, is this idea that we shouldn't listen to the public, or that we should simply make decisions for them because they're not they don't have the required knowledge to be able to make good decisions. And while that, in some senses, there might be some truth to it, it is not true in practice that is how the process will end up going. We know this from experience, because in the end, it's the public and the relevant stakeholders in society that end up making the decisions about what will be implemented. So this feeling from researchers of being frustrated by having to engage in this debate is something we have to overcome by doing it in a clever way, because ignoring it keeps creating unfortunate outcomes, right? So there are plenty of examples of this, but probably in this room, you're all familiar with how the GMO debate went in the EU. And so that was a good example of new technologies being developed by researchers and having a sort of a social debate, a societal debate that wasn't very well administered and wasn't very successful. And so we end up with a practice that isn't ideal. And I think no matter what side you fall on the GMO debate, we can all agree that the current implementation of the regulation of GMOs in the EU isn't very successful, and it's also changing very soon. So there's an understanding now that we need to deal with this contract, but that perhaps we can revise it and we can provide input as researchers into the revision of this contract. And that's why it's important to do this work in the research projects and not apart from them. So we need a renegotiation of the social contract. And that is in part because we're developing new technologies, but also because the background image is changing, right? So climate change is changing our priorities, cultural shifts are changing our priorities, and so forth. But how do we change it? And what does it look like currently, right? We need to understand what are the boundaries, or what is the social contract right now? What does it limit us to doing, to understand how we might need to impact it moving forward? And that is essentially what we're doing in Work Package 2. We've developed essentially a new method for technology assessment. It's inspired by previous methods developed both outside and inside the Danish Board of Technology. But overall, taken as a package, I think it is new and quite useful in many applications here, particular, of course, in ruminant breeding. And this is what it looks like. It has these 4 main pillars that I will quickly cover. But this is a general process that we move from a room of acceptance. Based on that, we develop some scenarios. Based on that, we test these scenarios in a citizen engagement. And based on that, we develop a final room of acceptance. So what's the room of acceptance? Well, it looks like this, at least a preliminary room of acceptance does. So the idea behind the room of acceptance is to try and map the boundaries of social acceptance of a given technology or set of technologies to understand how new developments within those areas might fit into these boundaries. And so, in other words, to assess if we're developing new technologies in RUMIGEN, we can score them within these boundaries you see on the screen. And if they fall inside the boundaries, generally we should expect it to find social acceptance and an ability to bring it into practice. Whereas if it falls outside the boundaries, generally we would not expect it to be able to be implemented in practice, at least without some significant changes to some of these parameters or to the technology itself. The way we developed it is that there's an initial desk study where you look at so the method is to look at similar debates that have happened in the literature and to understand the primary limiting factors of social acceptance of those technologies. So we're looking to find out what has previously defined similar technologies and the social acceptance of similar technologies, right? So you might not be able to read it on the screen, I don't know, but so that might be something like who benefits, whether it's primarily for the benefit of the animals, society, consumers, industry, research, and so forth. Whether there's a need for the technology, whether the technology itself is risky, and whether it is perceived to be risky, right? So to understand what are these driving factors of social acceptance, and there's a long list here, as you can see. The idea is to use a desk study to identify these dimensions in the first place, and then engage with the relevant stakeholders in a process to try and validate the dimensions that have been found, and to give them an initial scoring. So drawing the map as you see it here. Based on that initial scoring and a rough idea of how do we think this map looks like, the social acceptance map, we develop a set of scenarios that are roughly thought experiments that are intended to test these boundaries, right? So we develop scenarios that imagine future implementations of the technology, some of them realistic, some of them unrealistic, that are meant to challenge the boundaries, and so whether we score these dimensions correctly. The idea with these scenarios is we take them into a citizen engagement where we'll, in RUMIGEN, work with around 800 citizens in 8 EU countries, and we'll test these boundaries, right? And score the room of acceptance. The idea is that this is the real validation of the boundaries of social acceptance for the specific technologies that are being developed in RUMIGEN. Once we've done that, we should have a refined room of acceptance, so a new map like this that is significantly more accurate, on which we can score the technologies, we can place them inside this map, and we can understand whether they fall inside or outside the scope of social acceptance. That helps us understand where we might need to renegotiate the contract and which technologies within the RUMIGEN project, where there's a whole sort of range of technologies, which of them are likely to be possible to implement in practice, and also what will be the driving factors that we should concern ourselves with in moving into practice, right? So does a specific technology score really poorly on a specific dimension, for example? That'll help us to shape the development of the technology, and also the context around the technology. So that is the method as we've set it up. The reason I've talked method is that we are not as far along as GEroNIMO is. So we haven't gone to the citizens yet, so we don't have a lot of data to show yet. But we believe very strongly that this tool, this room of acceptance method, can be a really practical way to for research projects like RUMIGEN and other research projects to understand how their technologies are likely to be perceived by society, what social acceptance they're likely to find, and how we should, so sort of which areas of concern that should be focused on to ensure that you have the right impact. And the benefit of that is that we align development and this research with societal expectations and needs. So the development is driven by what we want, rather than developing the technology and then finding a use for it or space for it. It's more efficient. We avoid spending a lot of time developing technologies that have no chance of being implementable in practice. And we encourage a democratic, evidence-based decision process. So that earlier argument about the public don't know, well, if we go through this structured process, we work with the scenarios, we work with deep citizen engagement, we don't survey, we interview and talk and discuss more deeply with citizens, we can develop a more thought-through approach that gets us closer to the decisions that we want. And so that's a method we've developed in RUMIGEN, and we will go and meet the citizens and test our initial room of acceptance very soon. We should be doing that in January. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Rasmus, for your presentation. We don't have a lot of time, but if someone has a question, to be honest, I have loads, but I will keep them in because we're already almost on time. I don't see anything popping up right now. I have one final slide that says thank you. I'm just going to share it for a second. On this final slide, you can see the link to the international stakeholder platform from HoloRuminant. If you want to keep up to date also when the recordings from this different webinar series become available, you should just definitely follow us on the platform. So this was the third webinar from the series for now, but as you can already hear from the people who presented today, more results will be coming up. So we should definitely do this again. Keep an eye out when we are going to launch a second series. Yeah, so then the only thing that rests me now is to thank you for your participation and the presenters for their wonderful presentations. And if you want to know more, keep an eye out for the recordings, and you're always welcome to get in touch so we can point you to the right people or the right project. Yeah, thank you so much for joining today.